Okay. Hello, my lovelies, my wild darlings. Good to see you all. I'm Tad. It is 7 o'clock here in California, Northern California, so called. And I will be here until about 8 o'clock, about an hour from now, reading. We are reading, of course, from Happy Hour in Hell. And I will tell you more about where we are in that in just a moment. First off, just to bring you up to date on anything of interest going on, not much. I just finished, although I still have to do a quick polish of it, but I just finished a short story that I had forgotten until I got back from out of town. Well, not forgotten, but had put aside until I got back from out of town for an anthology edited by Peter Arulian and I believe Sean Speakman. Sean is certainly, I think, helping out. So I've written a short story for that, which, as I mentioned, I had kind of put aside till after I got back from the trip and then got through the jet lag and all that stuff. So once I finish that off tomorrow and put it in the electronic courier, the Mojo Wire, as Hunter S. Thompson used to say about the fax machine, although in my case it'll just be regular email. I'll be sending that off and I'll be back to the Splintered Sun, which I'm getting close to the end of. Let me think. Anything else? Dogs? People? We have both. And cats. They're in the background there somewhere. Everybody is currently doing okay. We've got most of our young people here in the house this evening, but I had to leave to come downstairs and read to you guys. So that's nice. It's always good to have the family here doing family-ish things, which mostly consists of swapping trivia about movies and video games and playing video games, which I think they're doing upstairs right now, and stuff like that there. The doggies are being doggy as usual. We're in a period of relative peace between Johnny and Lemon, largely because Johnny has just kind of moved outside because it's good weather. And he just comes in at night once Lemon's gone in her crate, and he seems to be quite content. He will come in sometimes when she's here, and then I always put her on the tether just so that everybody is calm and casual and collected. But anyway, so dogs are doing okay. They're both still very sweet dogs, and they're great fun to hang out with. Cats behind me are okay. Everybody else, I think, as far as I know, is doing well. I'm knee deep in various insurance related matters because it seemed like everybody in the family decided to have a car catastrophe all at the same time, but that's not interesting. I won't bore you with that, but that's what's going to be taking up my time tomorrow when the regular office hours resume for all these different businesses. Well, let me think. Anything else? No, just mulling. I mentioned at some length last night that we had gone to a memorial service for one of our neighbors who we've known since we first moved here in 2011, and that was, as they always are, as an occasion for reflection and for thinking about what effect we have on the people around us and what we are going to leave behind when we're gone. And of course, just last summer, we finally had my parents' celebration of life, so-called, which was very heartening and lovely and only what they deserved. But these things always make us think. And so that has been a lot of what's been on my mind this weekend, not in a negative sense at all, I hasten to say, not in the sense of, grimness or darkness or depression. Because actually one good thing about getting to my semi-advanced age is that a lot of the stuff that seems really frightening when you're young, you realize I've already been around a long time, like if I were to get hit by a bus tomorrow or something, which I don't want to have happen, and I'm not planning on it, and I'm in fact planning to be around and writing for some time, many, many years, I hope, and seeing our kids grow up and seeing my friends' kids grow up and have kids of their own and all that kind of stuff, and my family members, my brothers and sisters-in-law and their kids. I mean, I'm looking forward to all the normal things that you look forward to when you get to be of a certain age. But I also realized that, if something happened tomorrow, I would not feel cheated at all. I have had a very exciting, fulfilling life in a lot of ways. And part of it is because I was able and have been able to do something that I love doing, and make a living at it. Although at times it's been difficult, but we have always persevered, and the fates and our readers have always been kind enough to keep us propped up. But also, just because you get to a certain age and you realize, like, you know, I'm not scared of it. I'm not scared of ceasing to be. That's not that big a deal. And I was very much heartened by this with my parents, both of whom who were very calm. And my mom even left a note behind, which we didn't see until we didn't hear it. It wasn't read to us until my brother found it sometime after. It was in her like medical file or something, where she had basically said, well, if the decision has to come where, my life support or whatever has to be turned off, please know that there is no regrets, nothing to feel bad about. I had a great life. If it's time for me to go, that's fine, And although I still have a lot left I want to do, and a lot of time I want to spend with Deb and my kids and, our ridiculous animals and all that, I definitely, I'm getting that now. I'm getting to the stage of life where I understand that. It's natural. It's what happens. It's sad, in the sense that when somebody dies, we don't get to see them anymore. Also, and I've said this many times, I'm not a believer that we are all going to meet up on, that heavenly shore or whatever it might be. That's just my own personal belief. I'm open to having my mind changed if I snuff it and suddenly find myself in Bobby Dollar land or somewhere else like that. I will do my best to adapt and explain myself to the heavenly judges or whatever. But whatever the case, I'm more concerned with living out the last part of my life in as good and useful and helpful and kind a way as possible than any concerns I have about, what happens, when it's finally over. And as I said, that, the way both of my parents were about it was just spot on as far as I'm concerned. So again, not to make this into a big bleak thing. I don't expect anybody to be talking about it or commenting on it or anything. It's just the kind of thing you think about when you go to a memorial service, or it was both a memorial service and a celebration of life. And in fact, it was very casual, and everybody there seemed to be in the spirit of the thing. I was the only person wearing a suit, for example, which, as I explained last night, I actually like wearing a suit when I do it by choice. So that's not a complaint. That was just an interesting fact to me that I went, oh, it's a memorial. I should go in a properly respectful outfit. And then, I was like everybody else there. People were in shorts, they were in all, t-shirts and denim vests and all kinds of stuff. So, but I had no problem with that either. I wanted to wear a suit, and I did. And I am very happy to be able to continue doing what I'm doing as long as I get to do what I'm doing, and as long as I can do it well enough that other people are still interested in it. And that's about the extent of that ramble. That's about all I have to say about it. So let me check in, see who has popped in and left a footprint of themselves. I see Christy saying, "Good evening, Mr. Tad," and I say, "Good evening, Ms. Christy." Claudia, hello, Claudia. Good to see you. Thank you, thank you. Oh, by the way, Claudia, I am no longer. When I first saw your name, I always, because I have a lot of German people on who show up for my readings and stuff like that. For some reason, I had the idea that you were German, so I was always pronouncing your name in the very German way of Claudia. But if you're American or not German, you very well may pronounce it Claudia, and I'm happy to pronounce it that way. I was just operating under a mistaken apprehension, so you feel free to let me know how you prefer to have your name pronounced. And if you really do prefer Claudia over Claudia, then please let me know and accept my apologies for my mistake. Anyway, Kelly, good evening. Good to see you too. That's Kelly Kenrick. Isaac, Good afternoon from the House of Fanged Cats. Well, what would the alternative be, we wonder? Would you pull all their little fangs? That wouldn't be very nice. The House of Gummy Cats also sounds like it's some kind of candy manufacturing factory or something. Anyway, Mark Craigbaum, hello, hello. And Mark sends a long and complicated apology about the improper use of the word granfalloon. Yeah, the way I remember granfalloon is that it sounds like balloon, and it has that meaning of something artificially inflated. So anyway, it's those of you, especially those who know about Vonnegut, it's worth reading Mark's very long comment. But I understood that, Mark. I did understand that. I did not think that you meant it in any other than a positive way. So don't worry about that, please. Anyway, but funny comment. Susan Shamblin, hello, greetings to you. Barban, hello, good to see you too. Christy says, inquiry, where's the gorilla that used to sit behind you? Well, that's a good question. Oh, that gorilla has gone back out to the garage because she is in need of repair. And I don't want her. Many years ago, something happened where for those who don't know, that is a life-size replica of Coco, stuffed, obviously, not a real gorilla, but a stuffed plush gorilla, life-size. And it was given to me originally by Betsy Walheim, my publisher. And Betsy gave it to me. Betsy has oftentimes given me gifts when I have completed books. Actually, I'll go get one. So I'm not gone. I'm just over here. But so after 7 years, when I finished To Green Angel Tower, and 7 years for the whole project from start to finish. But the last book, because it included a divorce and me moving to another country and various other things, was quite stressful and strenuous, but I finally finished it, and Betsy sent me this giant Coco, the sign language gorilla, stuffed animal in a gigantic box. And so that was Betsy's way of saying congratulations for getting the very large monkey off your back. And that's why I have Coco. And Coco has been a member of the family ever since. But Coco currently has a detached front of her neck, and there's fluff coming out and stuff like that. And I'm worried that the cats will start picking at her. So I moved her back out to the garage until I can find a way to stitch her back up again. Because as I said, she's a member of the family. Now, what I just went to go get, and I will show you, is so Betsy is a very generous person, first off, and that's always important to know. And her mom Elsie was generous also and used to send little presents and stuff. But Betsy gets big presents, so Coco was one of them. And then when I finished the other land books, to continue the primate-centered nature of Betsy's presents, she sent me a baboon skull from a place called Maxilla and Mandible, which I don't believe exists anymore in New York, but was a store that carried all kinds of bones and skeletal things and all kinds of stuff. And Betsy sent me this baboon skull, which has been my companion ever since. A little dark when you consider that the baboon character was actually a real person, but this was not a real person. This was a real baboon at one point. I don't know how it came to be a skull. Well, I mean, I know it had a skull to begin with. I don't know how it wound up in Maxilla and Mandible. But anyway, so Betsy sent me that as a congratulations, you have finished another gigantic book project. So, I don't know, how did I get onto this? Oh, so that was the answer, Christy, to the why is Coco not behind me anymore. And of course, the other thing about Coco, and one of the reasons that she was significant, is not only was she a sign language gorilla, but basically for many, many years, we lived just down the road from Coco, the sign language gorilla, in Woodside. And we never got to go visit her. I would have loved to have. But we did live fairly near, and we had a property where we were going to build a house, which was literally, quarter of a mile from the Gorilla Foundation. But for various complicated reasons, that house never got built, and we then some years after that, moved over here to this side of the hills to the Santa Cruz area. But anyway, so Coco always had deep significance for me. I actually wrote a script once when I was first thinking about trying to do films called Angels in the Trees, which was about a speaking gorilla. In that case, it was a gorilla who had a language board, which was something that showed up later on in, I believe, Congo by Michael Crichton. But it was not something either one of us thought about. It's an experiment that people had tried before. But anyway, so enough rambling. So that's my answer to Christy, and I hope that makes sense despite the long, complicated, swirling around nature of it. Kristen, hello, hello. Good to see you. Kristen says, hi, Yad. So I guess this is a thing now. All right. Jeremy, hello. Not sure you're up to sticking around in hell this evening. Oh, come on. Hell is tons of fun. Emily, anyway, hi, Jeremy. Good to see you. Emily, hello. Lovely to see you, too. Felina, nice to see you again. It's been a while. A pleasure. Christy, oh, yeah. There are no words for this kind of stuff. If you had a good relationship with a parent, it is so painful and difficult to lose them, and you don't even realize until after it happens how intrinsic they are to who you are and to your entire view of not just the world and the universe. And actually, I was talking the other day, maybe it was even last night, I don't remember. No, it was today. About Michael Whalen once said to me, I consider my life to be two parts. First one is all my life before I had kids, and then everything after I had kids. And for me, I would say, yes, not only do I agree with that, but I would sincerely consider that there's a third part that comes when your parents are gone, because it fundamentally changes the nature of the universe, the internal nature of the personal universe. That idea that they're not here anymore. They were so central for me and for many people. And then also that bizarre realization of like, wow, I am now part of the older I am the older generation. In my family, I am now actually literally the oldest person in my, me, my brothers, their wives, all the kids, it's like I am, because I was the oldest brother, I am the oldest. And that's a weird kind of conceptual loop as well that's interesting to navigate. So anyway, so Christy, my deep sympathies, obviously, and I'm glad that she was special enough to her that you still remember her with such fondness. Mark, hello, that's another Mark. That's Mark Gamble, and another lovely human being. Good to see you, Mark. And do I remember you sending me a Facebook message or something that you were going to be around in this area? If so, I'll go back and check, because we'd love to see you if possible. Felina says, mortality is an absolute, but pondering it is more real now that I've watched Family Going. It's not too scary, I think. Yeah, sometime we'll actually have a conversation about this, because there's a lot of stuff that I've been reading lately that would be interesting to talk about, but I've already spent a long time, and it's almost time to start reading, so I won't get into it now, but remind me, Felina, and we will come back to this subject. Carrie Martin says, hello, hello, and I say, hello, hello, Carrie. Ian T. Williams, hello, loving these latest readings. Thank you so much. Claudia says, I answer to both, but most people say it the American way. Okay, well, I'm happy to say it either way, but I will probably say it more Claudia than Claudia from now on. Christy likes the backstory. Tim Speckens, hello, hello. Tim is talking about my talking about designing hell. And, Tim wants to know if I'd watched The Good Place on TV. No, I haven't, but I know a lot about it because my kids watched it. And I am very sparing with how much time I put into watching television these days, especially anything that will engage my interest. I tend to watch television as more of a way to turn my brain off at night. So I watch certain kinds of things, but I don't spend a lot of time watching things that I know are good, because that's not my purpose with TV most of the time. It's to turn the brain off. So Sorry, I just saw a comment further down. But anyway, so no, but I've heard a lot of good things about it. And I know the general premise and I know who's in it and some of the ins and outs of it. Because again, my kids would be watching it and I would be walking through and I'd stop and watch part of it. So, but I don't know what all the mechanics of it is. So I can't compare it to my own process, I'm afraid. Anyway. Kristen, oh Kristen, so you did that was an accident. It was because you said Yad last time, and I would kind of like lightly, kindly teased you about it. I thought now that was going to be my name, that you were going to give me that as my full-time name, that I was going to be Yad. Anyway, no worries, no biggie. Trish, hello, thank you, good to see you, and good to have you back with us. And yeah, Felina says, my real perception moment was when I realized the number of people who've known me since I was born can only decrease. That is true. That is very true. Okay, so with all of those thoughts, and they are many, and there are many more possible ones that we can get into at some other time, but I am going to continue with this particular examination of mortality and immortality, which is Happy Hour in Hell. And for those of you who were not listening last night or who haven't caught up yet, Bobby was traveling with Rip Rash, the roving evangelical demon ogre, and was actually kind of shanghaied in Gravejaw, which is a town, essentially, in hell along the Caucasus River. Which, by the way, for those of you who don't know or have never heard that before, that's the way that I was taught to pronounce something that's also sometimes called Cocytus or Cocytus, but it's one of the rivers of hell, along with Styx, Acheron, various others. So, yeah, Phlegethon or Phlegathon and Leith, I believe, are the others. But anyway, so that's when I'm saying Cocytus, it's Cocytus. It's one of the rivers of hell. Anyway, so Bobby had been essentially dropped off, but he was intercepted by Nylok, the commissar, who had, pretending not to know who Bobby was, or pretending not to know that he was somebody who was wanted by the authorities, invited him home in a way that Bobby could not refuse. But once he got him back to his house and made him eat a truly disgusting dinner, he then announced to him, essentially, I know who you are. You are the person who's broken into hell that everybody's looking for. And my little servant Green Teeth, my jester, as he calls him, and I are going to start torturing you tomorrow. So Bobby found himself locked in a cell, and discovered that he could hear somebody weeping, which turned out to be the disembodied ghost of one of Nylok's former lovers, a female demon called Heart Spider, or at least a female something. We don't know. You're in hell. You're either a demon or you're a damned soul. But anyway, so that's what's going on. So he was trying to see if there was any way she could help him to escape, because she was cursing Nylok and saying, what all the terrible things she'd do to him. All kinds of unpleasant stuff. So anyway, that's where we are, and I'm going to continue from there. My chains rattled as I slumped back against the wall. I shared her hatred. One thing about being trapped in hell, I was definitely, I was definitely finding it easier to hate, but it did neither of us any good. Heart Spider wore down at last, trailing into whispers. For a long time, neither of us spoke. My mind was racing, but like a rat in a maze, each turn led to another dead end. The floor, she said suddenly. I stirred. What? The floor. I watched you nearly manage to pull your hands out of the shackles. The floor is slippery with blood and fat, far more than just my own. A dozen or more after me have been dispatched here, and the slaves have not washed it down. So, try to get some of it onto your wrists. Maybe then you can slip loose. I was about to tell her that I could not reach the floor, not nearly, when I realized that I was standing an inch deep in the very muck she was talking about. I lifted my foot as far as I could and heard a dollop of something unpleasant drip from my toes and spatter the floor. I tried again and managed to bend my knee and lift my foot as high as my own waist, but it was still far from my shackles. I twitched, trying to fling the stuff at my wrists, and felt it splash across my chest and shoulder. I tried again and again. I don't know how much later it was when the bolt rattled and the door swung inward, but I had been in complete darkness so long that the light of a single torch was blinding. Bells jingled softly. It was Nyloc's jester, Greenteeth. The warty thing lurched closer to examine me, its mouth full of poisonous sharpness, like a Viet Cong pit trap. The jester was short, but its stunted arms and legs were heavy as a gorilla's, and though it scarcely topped my waist, I had no doubt that Greenteeth outweighed me. I gripped the manacles in my aching hands and wondered when it would notice they weren't around my wrists any longer. "Ready, you?" it asked in a disturbingly wet voice. I still couldn't make out any eyes, but I could tell it was examining me, especially my bloody arms, pawing at my skin and tasting its cold, knobby fingers. "Trying to get free? Of course, but not too much hurt things. Will spoil the music of what soon we do." It reached out a hand so it could stroke my chest. Even with all the pain I was already in, that clammy touch of the thing made me shudder and flinch backward. "Oh, no, no fear. Together we will work for goodness. Together we will make something wonderful. Quite?" Then Greenteeth finally noticed that I had slipped my cuffs and was only holding them. Still no eyes, but the toothy mouth gaped in surprise. I didn't give the horror time to raise the alarm, but kicked as hard as I could where I thought it might be vulnerable, somewhere between the legs and the chest. It dropped the torch, which guttered but did not go out, and as it stumbled and fell onto its back, wheezing with what I hoped was severe, crippling pain, I jumped onto it with both feet, then proceeded to leap up and down as hard as I could, paying no attention to the sensation of bones cracking beneath my heels, because I had no idea how strong the thing might be. When the body got too slippery for me to maintain my balance, I stepped down and started kicking, working its head and chest. "He won't hurt you now," said Heart Spider at last. She sounded like she'd enjoyed what had just happened. "Won't hurt anything, not for a long time." But there was a frenzied anger in me that wouldn't let go, and I kicked the rubbery, broken thing another half-dozen times, seeing dim sprays of fluid in the half-light and liking the way they looked. When I stopped, I was gasping, and my heart beat like a stamping press set on high, but all I wanted to do was kick the nasty thing some more. Hell was definitely getting to me. I found the key on its belt, along with a string of little bells and enough sharp objects to get an entire street gang thrown in jail. I wiped scum off the torch until it burned brightly again, and at Heart Spider's direction, I gathered up her bones, still ribboned with leathery shreds of flesh. I had nothing to carry them in, but I found some rags stiff with old blood and tied them into a hobo's bindle, then slung it over my shoulder. The bones clicked against each other as I made my way back out into the dark corridor. I swear they sounded happy. Heart Spider spoke into my ear, making me jump. "If only we could give Nylock the same, but he is too strong for you." I had no urge to encounter my host again. "Just tell me where to go. How do I get out?" "Down. Like most lordlings in hell, the Commissar of Wings and Claws has many ways in and out of his lair. Down, where the boilers are. Down." I let her guide me downstairs and across several basement floors. Even in the middle of the infernal night, there were sounds coming from behind doors that made me pray. Yes, pray, that I never had to see what was on the other side. The place was a maze, and by the time we found our way down to what Heartspider told me was the lowest level, I was certain that Nylock or his slaves must have noticed the mess I'd left behind, especially because most of it had been his beloved Jester. The bottom room was more like the Roman catacombs, endless arches of heavy stone and gigantic pipes that looked like they might have been made of fired clay, lit by the kind of globe lights I had seen in the entry hall. It looked almost ordinary, like the underbelly of a subway station or some other bit of urban architecture, except for the bulging pipes and the curses written on the walls by slaves or prisoners in their own blood. "The breath of the underworld," Heartspider said when I asked her what the pipes carried. "It fires the lights and Nylock's machines." Which must be the volcanic gas he'd bragged about, the endless supply that had helped make the Commissar a powerful lord in these central realms of hell. I could hear noises drifting down from above now, voices shouting and the slap of feet. I knew I didn't have long, so I let Heartspider guide me through the maze of tunnels and pipes. Unfortunately, she didn't know the bottom level all that well, so I spent as much time retracing my steps as going forward, and each moment I got more nervous. Nylock must be searching the house, and how long before a party would be sent down here? The distances between lights was growing longer. If I hadn't had the torch, I would never have found my way. "There!" Heartspider told me as we rounded a corner. At the end of the passage, a ladder of ancient wood led upward into a vertical tunnel. "That passage leads up to the gardens. From there you can find a way off Nylock's land and burn my bones. Then I'll be free to begin again." Heartspider's words had given me an idea. I searched the floor until I found a piece of loose stone, then stretched up as high as I could and smashed the shining globe at the end of the corridor. I ran back up the passage and quickly smashed a dozen more. "What are you doing?" Heartspider demanded. "Nylock will be out with his hunting birds in a moment. They'll shred you with their iron beaks. You can't wait. You must get me off his land or I will never be free." I could hear the gas hissing out of the broken lights as I ran back. This wouldn't be the fancy kind of gas that had a smell, but I was pretty sure it could damage me. So I hurried to the ladder and started climbing. At the top, I found my way blocked by a rusted iron hatch, but the thing hadn't been all the way closed, and I was able to force it open, although not without doing more damage to my already torn and bloody demon body. When I climbed out into the relative brightness of the lit garden, I pushed the lid down again and sat on it. I could hear excited noises from Gravejaw House a short distance away, so I knew I didn't have long, but despite Heartspider hissing and snarling in my ear, I waited. "He'll come! He'll find you! His dogs will chew your bones and mine!" I ignored her. She raged at me, but I wouldn't move. "You fool! What are you doing? Do you have any idea?" Somewhere, just out of my sight, I heard the great front doors creak as someone began to draw the bolt, which probably meant Nylock had finished searching the house, or at least had decided it was unlikely I was still inside. Any moment now, he would come riding out with slaves and soldiers and his iron-mouthed birds, whatever kind of horror those were. "You traitor! You are dooming yourself, too!" Even as Heartspider's voice rose to a pitch of despair I felt sure the Commissar would be able to hear, I turned and yanked the hatch back open. It screeched as rusty metal rubbed on metal, resisting me, but I only had to get it up just a little way. I pushed the torch through and forced the hatch closed again, then started to run across the stony garden, heading for the shelter of a copse of petrified trees. The ground shook. For a moment, the grounds in front of me were illuminated by a gust of fiery light as the burning gas forced its way out of the hatch, blowing the metal lid through the air like a communion wafer in a tornado. It almost hit me as it came down, digging deep into the ground. Then a roll of thunder shook the ground again, and Gravejaw House vomited fire from half its windows. Heart Spider had been too stunned to speak, but as I crept back toward the hatch, she began to beg me not to waste this chance. I'm not even sure she knew that I had caused the explosion. The flames were licking up from the tunnel as though the whole of the catacombs were on fire. The ground boomed and shook beneath me. When I steadied myself again, I saw that one of the walls of Gravejaw House was toppling in an avalanche of old stone. I could hear a few screams from the part of the house still standing. Heart Spider was right. I really didn't want to hang out there very long. I took the bundle of her bones from my shoulder and tossed it into the hatch. Heart Spider's voice shrieked in my ears. "Traitor! Traitor! I put my curse on..." And then she fell silent as the bones ticked down the hatchway tunnel into the inferno below, and she realized what was happening. "Ah!" she gasped like a drowning woman who had finally broken the surface. And then, as baking heat scorched her last remains to ash, she was gone. "Yes, I did it," I said, although I was talking only to myself now. "After all, a deal is a deal." As I made my way across the grounds, curious bystanders flocked into the gardens and toward the commissar's castle, staring in awe at the pillar of fire currently towering above Gravejaw House. Demon spectators, mostly. Tellingly, not a single one seemed to be there to help, but stood watching as Nylok slaves struggled against the hungry blaze. Of the slave's owner there was no sign, and I wasn't going to wait around to see if the commissar had survived. I sort of doubted you could kill one of hell's nobles with fire anyway. The problem was so many damned and demons were milling around that someone was bound to remember me when Nylok came thundering out after revenge. One of the spectators, a creature with the discolored head of a pig set on the long body of an NBA shooting guard, followed me as I tried to make my way discreetly through the outskirts of the crowd. "You there," he said, "slave! Stop or I'll have you skinned." My dirty, scorched, bloody nakedness was disguise enough, it seemed, at least with this idiot. But seeing him standing there in his long black robe gave me another idea. "How is our beloved commissar?" he demanded. "Is he safe? You must tell him that his loyal tradesman, Trotter, asked after his health." I nodded eagerly and beckoned him to follow me. He fell in behind, hoping to be led to the commissar himself so he could get in a little timely ass-kissing. When we were out of sight of the rest of the onlookers, I hurried through the winding gardens. The skeletonized shrubs were weeping, trying helplessly to shake falling embers off their leaves. When we reached the nearest hatch, I did my best to ignore the hot metal against my torn skin as I got close. The flames had retreated, but not far, and the hot air that rushed up from the pipe felt like it blistered my skin. "See," I said. "See, master, see." Trotter stepped forward, curiosity fighting caution, and stood a little way back from the pipe, craning his piggy head forward on the end of his long neck in an attempt to see. I leaned out over the hatch as if the agonizing heat wasn't hurting me and beckoned again. "Look!" When he had leaned far enough, I shoved him down with enough force to crush his windpipe against the rim of the pipe. As he fought for breath, I slammed his head over and over against the edge of the hatch until he stopped struggling, then peeled off his robe with bloody, ragged fingers. Trotter's body was as gray and knobby and unpleasant as I would have expected. I suppose I should have felt sorry for him, or bad about myself, since I had just murdered him in cold blood and everything. Well, horribly crippled him, since no one died in hell. But I didn't. I didn't have enough me left. All I knew was that I had to get out of Gravejaw and up the Great Lifter. I no longer had only to reach Pandemonium and accomplish my business without being caught, although it would be 100 times harder now that hell would be looking for an outsider on the loose. No, it was crystal clear that I had to find Kaz and get out of this place of unending horrors before I went truly and finally mad. Chapter 19. going down. The good thing was that I could see the gigantic lifter shaft from pretty much anywhere in the city of Gravejaw. The bad thing was that even after I had scrambled across the endless scorched wasteland of Nylock's Gardens and climbed the outer wall, I still had to get across the entire wretched slum to reach it. Apparently, the Commissar of Wings and Claws had seen the immense structure as an insult to his own awesomeness, so he had set up housekeeping on the highest piece of land, which happened to be a couple of miles away from the lifter. Now that his house was going up in flames, the reddish light made it seem like hell's midday had come early, and I could see a great throng of hellfolk hurrying up the hill toward me from the surrounding city. I was just looking around for something to use as a weapon when the first of them reached me and sprinted past, hurrying toward the disaster. They just kept coming, more and more, shouting, honking, making noises I don't have words for. Some hopped and some flew, although not well enough to write home about, and others teeter-tottered along on mismatched legs, but none of them gave me much more than a glance. The stolen robe helped, and I guess I wasn't burned enough to be worth staring at. I fought my way against the throng like a queer salmon in spawning season, trying as hard as you'd guess to avoid body contact, but still getting speared, smeared, or dusted every few steps. Very few of the creatures pushing past me seemed upset or frightened by what was happening. In fact, to judge by the hundreds of deformed faces I saw, most seemed downright thrilled, and the rest were at least interested. I don't think the Commissar had a lot of fans. I pushed free of the worst of the mob at last and hurried down to the base of the hill. There were still residents in the narrow streets of Gravejaw, demons and damned who couldn't just drop their business to go watch something fun. Many were blind, and some had sensory organs so alien they might not even have realized what was going on. Others clearly just couldn't move fast enough. I passed a thin man hopping slowly along the road, waving his right hand as I passed him. Only when I turned to look back did I realize that he only had a right. He had been bisected from head to crotch like a medical cadaver being prepared for one of those see-through views, and was hopping on one foot, trying to balance that thin half-body and half-head with his single arm. As I looked back, I could see his exposed organs and brain flash wetly as he wobbled. Creatures like salted slugs, like toads with bone disease, or broken-winged birds, many with heads too big for the bodies, or bodies too big for the heads. I hurried past them all, trying not to see too much, but still seeing more than I wanted. The lower part of Gravejaw was built on a series of small hills, and following the tiny streets up and down was like being on the world's only human-powered roller coaster. I ran through half the city, it seemed, out of the center and into outer districts where trading and torture went on side by side, as if it were any other night. Even this far away, the ones with eyes must have been able to see the burning castle on the hilltop, but none of them seemed to care very much. The only comment I heard was from a mostly skeletal, three-eyed giant with a hammer, who was carefully crushing the shin bones of a chained prisoner in front of what must have been a very strange shop. He looked up to the hilltop as I hurried by and said to his companion, who was digging at the same prisoner's eye with a spoon, "It's burning good, burning real good." His companion looked up for a moment, nodded, then accidentally dropped his spoon into the muck at his feet. He picked it up, carefully licked it clean, and then went back to work. I passed buildings that looked like factories, the sort of hellish mills that even William Blake probably couldn't have imagined. Some streamed blood-colored sewage, and the doorways were littered with burned and mangled bodies of what were probably accident-prone employees, many of them scraping at the iron factory doors to get back in. I heard the clang of huge machines and watched smoke and steam belching from furnace chimneys. I couldn't help noticing that things on this level had advanced from the medieval tech of Abaddon to something a bit more 18th century. Steam and infernal machines dwelling happily alongside plague and utter poverty. The closer I got to the lifter shaft, the more awesome the structure became. Like a skyscraper, the stone cylinder was nearly as big around as a city block, but that was nothing compared to how high it stretched upward before its length vanished in the upper darkness. I couldn't imagine how something so tall supported its own weight without guy wires or buttresses. It was an engineering feat that would have made any pharaoh proud. The lifter stood in the middle of a busy town square, an open plaza like the kind you sometimes see around the big cathedrals in Europe. As I approached, more cautiously now, a few people wandered out of the archways at the bottom of the shaft. The crowds in the square here seemed all but oblivious to Nilok's burning citadel, going on with their public business of theft, gambling, fornication, and various other pastimes. I was in an area where someone in a hurry drew no attention at all, except for the usual swarm of pickpockets, rapists, and knife-wielding psychopaths that hang around anywhere people arrive and depart. If I had slowed down, I'm sure they would have begun to move in on me, but as it was, I must have looked like too much work. I entered the lifter tower through the nearest arch and saw there were actually several individual lifter cars traveling up and down narrower shafts that ran through the big building like nerves in their sheaths. I stayed back for a bit, watching, but in most ways it looked pretty straightforward, not much different than an elevator bank in a modern office building. One of the lifter doors would open, and those waiting would push their way on while others forced their way out. The passengers looked more prosperous than the wretches lolling outside in the plaza. Many of these travelers were dressed in impressive outfits, and some were so physically imposing that no one else would get into the lifter with them for fear of being smashed or spiked. That made sense, though. The wealthy were more likely to be using the lifters than the pathetic groundlings. I knew from Lame's implanted memories that Hell's inhabitants were strongly discouraged from going above their designated levels, and who was going to go any farther down voluntarily? After watching for what felt like 10 minutes or so, I waited until the most recent group of passengers had dispersed, then gathered my courage to walk to the nearest lifter door. Another fellow shuffled up beside me, probably the demon equivalent of a Japanese salaryman at the end of a long night's work, and we entered the lifter together. We were the only passengers, but the interior of the rusty iron box was full of trash and spattered fluids, some still wet. My fellow passenger had a head like a buzzard, but his eyes were multifaceted, like a fly's. He was dressed in shabby but fairly clean gray robes that exposed only his clawed feet. He gave me a cold look and an even colder nod, then lifted his hand. Instead of being feathered, it looked like another bird's foot, and placed it on the wall of the lifter. He mumbled something I couldn't quite hear, but I was already scrambling to imitate him. I put my hand against the gritty iron wall and quietly said, "Pandemonium." I was half ready to be quizzed about my bona fides, but instead the door slid creakily shut, and the lifter started to shudder. The shuddering went on and on for what seemed like a full minute. Then, at last, the lifter groaned, a noise like a giant metal cow giving birth, and to my silent joy and relief, the box began to move upward. Slowly at first, then faster and faster, we rattled up the great pipe. The lifter car, which was built more like a bank safe than a flimsy human elevator, nevertheless shook and screeched so much as it was tugged or pushed upward that at first I was certain we were going to derail, or whatever the hell elevators do when they go wrong. Instead, we just kept going faster and faster, so that my ears began popping like popcorn. Then a flat, uncaring voice said, "Sour Milk Park, hateful, lower child skull," and the elevator slowed to a banging halt. The fly buzzard man waited until the door squeaked open, then stepped out without a backward glance, as if in a hurry to get away from me, just like folks back home. I waited as the steam built up again, or whatever, everything hissing and vibrating. The door began to slide closed. It was Amazing to consider that after all I'd gone through, I was now only a short elevator ride from my destination. If I had been a regular angel, I would have felt confirmed that God really was watching over me after all, and was going to reward me for all my years of good behavior. Of course, if I had been a regular angel, I would already have banked a few years of good behavior, just in case. Sadly, though, that is one of the many accounts with my name on it that's come up a bit short. But just before the door finished closing, something dark poked through and stopped it. The appendage gripping the door looked less like a hand and more like something you might find buried in a cat's litter box. The force of the door being restrained seemed to make the whole lifter strain as if it was determined to break the deadlock or destroy itself trying. The mechanism whined. The shuddering increased. Then the door slid back open. The thing that stepped in was a bulky man shape made entirely of mud. It was naked and nearly without features except for a popped bubble of a mouth and a blob of wet clay that I guessed was a nose, mostly because it was somewhere near the two glowing yellow smears it wore for eyes. If I tell you those eyes looked like some kind of irradiated slugs emerging from a seabed, you'll maybe begin to grasp how much I didn't like looking at them. But it wasn't just the eyes. I could feel this new thing, feel its age and inhumanity. I don't know what it was, but it was no ordinary demon. The passenger blob stopped inside the door, and its weight actually made the massive car tilt. The shapeless face swiveled toward me for a moment, but then slowly kept turning, examining the entire empty lifter as though I was so insignificant that before it acknowledged me, it had to establish what someone not being there looked like. Being alone in a confined space with the thing made me feel trapped and queasy. This was no mere infernal salaryman. This was something old and powerful. The door closed. The thing stretched its flat, muddy paw to the wall. When it spoke its destination, I was so disturbed by the squelchy, inhuman voice that I only registered some moments later that it had said Tartarus Station. Something was seriously wrong. I knew a bit of Hell's geography, both from Lame and my travels, and I was pretty fucking sure that the direction to Tartarus Station wasn't up, where I was going, but down, way down. Then the hissing and the trembling crested, and the lifter started to drop. I stared in dismay. The mud thing looked back at me, as disinterested as a statue. We're going down, I said finally. The thing gave me as much response as it thought my observation deserved, which was none. But I'm going up, I said, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. That is, I need to go up to Pandemonium. It's important. The thing just stared at me with those glowing egg yolk eyes. I'm not joking. I need to go to Pandemonium. At last it opened its mouth. The words came out in sticky chunks like someone digging in a bog with a shovel.
We have taken control of the lifter. We have been given a priority task by the Mastema. Use of the lifter will be returned to you when we have departed.
The Mastema was one of the most powerful tools of the adversary, a security group of sorts like the SS were to the Nazis. But I had already guessed that this guy was bad, bad news. In the silence that followed his proclamation, I heard the announcement voice whispering in my ear as we flashed past Gravejaw again, then Greedy Pile, Seller of Organs, Cocytus Delta, Brown Water Toe, and Cocytus Landing. In just a few moments, we would be hurtling down through Abaddon, where I had first entered hell. My heart was hammering, but I was so obviously outclassed and outranked by the mud man that I dared not make a fuss. Perhaps once he got out, I could simply make the elevator go back up. Perhaps once he got out, I could simply make the elevator go back up again. Did I really think it would be that easy? Well, let's just say I was hoping. The lifter was dropping faster now, the voice spitting the names of the levels into my ears like a racetrack announcer trying to call a close four-horse finish. Abaddon Heights, Disease Row, Necro Flats, Acheron Fork, Lower Acheron Fork, Abaddon Waste. And then we were through the Abaddon levels and still plunging downward. At first I thought it was just fear that was making me feel feverish, but then I realized that the lifter cage was getting hotter and closer by the second. The sweat vaporized from my skin as soon as I squeezed it out. My blood hammered in my ears. The mud man ignored my gasps, immersed perhaps in thoughts of the horrible place he was going, the horrible things he would be doing. But now he began to change. His hide, or whatever it was that had made him look like he was smeared with something sticky, peanut butter or some less pleasant material, was beginning to harden like clay fired in a kiln. As he dried, his skin grew smoother, stonier, until he really did begin to look like a statue, a 7-foot-tall golem, dead but for the smoldering piss-yellow eyes. I could barely understand the announcements now, the words running together so that I could snatch only fragments. Flensing scar, tissue junction, hook, burning shrike, fistula. But it wasn't just the heat that made me feel like I was dying now. It was the words turning into pictures in my brain with no work from my own imagination. Somehow the depth acted on me like increasing pressure, forcing images into my head, endless halls full of screeching voices, reflex cries for help that the screecher knew wasn't coming, chambers as big as grand ballrooms full of stone tables, each table with a ruined but still living body writhing atop it, animals without eyes, rooms full of thunder and blood spray, the pounding of metal against vulnerable flesh, barking dogs, howling wolves, and through it all, a sensation of unparalleled misery and hopelessness that squeezed my skull like a monstrous pair of pliers. I can't, I gasped. The clay thing stared at me for a moment, then looked away as if I were a leaf that had blown across its path. The pressure grew stronger, but the other passenger had simply become more compact, more shiny, as if it had been glazed and fired in a kiln. Punishment, punishment, punishment. Every name the voice whispered into my head seemed to have that word in it. Punishment. We were heading down into the ultimate depths, where the worst work of hell went on in endless night, pain measured out in just the right sized doses to last as long as the universe itself. Even worse, though, I could feel something else now, something that enwrapped and increased the other bad feelings like a crushing, ice-cold fist. I can't explain it. I'll never be able to. Although it came on slowly, when I finally could pick it out from the other kinds of horror, it was the worst thing I've ever felt. Freezing cold, but I'm not talking about temperature, like ice and snow. This was the cold of the absolute dark, the cold in which nothing could live, the point at which even the play of atoms slowed to a stop. Empty. Nothing. The end. But what was most terrifying about it, what blasted even the horrors of all hell's pain and suffering out of my head, was that this bleak void at the bottom of everything was alive. I don't know how I knew, but I did. It was alive, and it thought, And even though it was still tremendously far away, its presence sent my own thoughts shrieking in all directions, like chickens trapped in a henhouse by a bloody-mouthed wolf. I realized that I had fallen on my knees, clutching my head to keep my skull from exploding, retching out what little was in my stomach. Still, the pressure and the sense of the thinking, waiting darkness grew worse. I was shrieking, babbling. I might even have screamed that I was an angel for all I know, but the clay creature sharing the lifter paid no attention. I could feel my eyes forced out of their sockets from within, could feel my guts crushed like I'd been rammed from both sides by garbage trucks, could feel what was left of my sanity pouring out of a me-shaped hole like dirty water down a drain. And then we stopped. And that's where we're going to stop for the night, on that cheerful note. Because, I wouldn't want you guys going all week thinking like, gosh, why did we have to stop on something grim and nasty? Thank goodness Tad stopped on something cheerful and fun. Anyway, let me just get rid of a few things here just to get them off of my screen. So with that, we say, Max and I, there's Max. Max and I say thank you for joining us. As always, it's been a huge pleasure to spend some time with you. I appreciate you. I want you, all of you, to take good care of yourselves. That is the first step. Can't help anybody else if you can't take care of yourself. So take care of yourself. That includes your mental health. Take care of your friends and loved ones. Keep an eye out for others who might need something from you. A kind word, a couple of bucks. Who knows? Some directions, some actual, real, true directions. Something useful. But whatever the case is, do take good care. And be well and peace. And I will see you very soon. Somehow I just set off the balloons. I don't know why. Anyway, see you later. Be well.